So we've been talking about, quote, modern marketing for quite a few years. So what does modern marketing actually mean today? Tim, could you go ahead and kick us off?
Of course. So, I mean, for me, modern marketing, I've been in marketing for a long time now. I keep forgetting how old I am. And, I've seen marketing change drastically over the past 5 years, massively across various different organizations. Heavily focused now. Marketeers were traditionally about the way things look, the way things feel, but data has massively taken over. More and more I'm now seeing in marketing departments, they have to focus around data. So marketeers are really transforming themselves into data specialists as well as that kind of acquisition, that brand specialist at the same time.
Yeah, and I think Emily, to your point, you know, we've been talking about it a long time. In my mind, it really hasn't changed what a marketer needs to do. Right? It's getting that right message out to the right person at the right time through the right channel with the right call to action. So that part hasn't changed in my mind. I think the thing that's different today is that customer expectations are changing massively. They're accelerating. The pandemic has even exacerbated that further. And so we've got this changing customer expectation along with a massively changing technology environment too. So the two of those things together really create an interesting time for marketers today to be able to be responsive as customers expect.
Yeah, and I think, Matt, what you're saying about the rate of change is so important. I mean, if you look at the trajectory of just the world and marketing in general, the rate of change is increasing. So if we're talking about it in math terms, it's an exponential curve. And I think that's the key piece for CMOs and marketers where they want a period of time. They're hoping that there's this lull when it slows down, they can catch up, but that doesn't exist today. It just gets faster and faster. The change is more and more every time. And I think you look at the history of marketing, it started on the brand side. And so it's a layering. It's not that brand has gone away. So it went from brand focus to, we've all heard, customer consumer focus. It then went to data focus. And now you see all those things converging. And to exactly what you're saying, Matt, there's an aspect of now the consumer controls the experience, wants all those three things plus a privacy lens in a way that is applicable, but not too applicable. And so I think there's that layering growth of marketing, and that pace is picking up. And it's that adaptation now of what modern is. It's that you have to be ready for the future. You can't sit on the same practices that you had a month ago, 2 months ago, and let alone 12 months, 2 years ago. And so I think that aspect of speed is so important. And I think the other aspect that we see a ton of is that from a marketer's perspective today, like you were mentioning and like Tim was mentioning, there is that aspect of, it's not just that you know the brand anymore. You have to sort of be deep in a lot of areas. You have to know tech. You got to know data science. You got to know classic marketing principles, which are still applicable today. So there's so much more to that job, so much more to the role, and there's so much more to balance. And it's become a complex, complex navigation, much more than it was historically.
And I think a lot of CMOs are discouraged about the lack of progress in this area, or this transformation towards a modern marketing organization. So what are some of the challenges that you see them facing today? I know you've mentioned a few. Any others you wanted to highlight?
This one is one that's kind of been around forever, but there's this chasm that exists between the technology organization and the marketing organization. It's who owns the decisions on what technologies are going to be used, who owns the implementation and driving which partners are going to be used and which implementation teams are going to do the work. I would also say, is IT being a good strategic partner for marketing? Technology organizations have their own drivers, and it may be a cost-centric focus where that's not really what a marketer is necessarily trying to tackle. So that chasm exists, and I think that's kind of a headwind that CMOs have to face, and they can't do it alone. It needs to really, it needs to be a partnership where there's communication and collaboration along the way so that roles and responsibilities are clear. And I think just an openness to doing things differently than how they've done them in the past is important for both the tech and the marketing organizations to think about.
I completely agree. I think for me, one of the biggest difficulties is the translation between a CMO and a CIO. There's so many miscommunications, lack of understanding of the goals that they're trying to achieve. And often you find, from a marketing point of view, they go one direction. From a CIO point of view, they're going a completely different direction in terms of data security and agility and often, the two never meet. But I think more and more now, CMOs really need to understand the entire technology capability of an organization and the platforms that they're moving to, and leveraging that experience and that capability.
Yeah, and I think if you think about organizations today, they're structured in horizontals and verticals. And what I mean by that are verticals are typically revenue centers. These are what CMOs own as brand owners. They are responsible for driving revenue, for purchase, etc. Those outcome metrics, and that's a vertical. So it makes a ton of sense of how they manage their business. Historically, technology and now data science and analytics have been horizontals. They are cost centers. And that intersection of those two groups and that discussion is so key today, because it used to be that they could be a bit more divorced and the two could sort of operate and function in an org and be fine. But today it's so critical that those two orgs meet with the same use case to have an agreed upon way to maximize efficiency, the cost savings, the effectiveness of implementing technology and toolkits. And so there is an intersection now, Tim, as you're saying, with CIOs, CTOs, CAOs, CDOs, with your CMOs and your product owners. And I think for the organizations that do what we consider modern marketing well, that convergence is happening. It's not always the easiest thing, as we all know. It's not always the cleanest thing, but that conversation around, do we have the same view of a use case? Do we have the same view of how to run our business, both from a horizontal and a vertical perspective? That's such a key component today that probably didn't exist 2-3 years ago. And so you're seeing that, I think, in a lot of orgs as they face the challenge of how do we transform, how do we become a different entity? And so that personnel component, that skill set component now is much more so coming to a head. You have to be able to translate in the highest level conversations, technical concepts, marketing concepts, business outcome metrics, and make that all come together in terms of the entirety of the business plan. So it's a challenging landscape to navigate.
To add to that, I guess you've got the vertical and horizontals across, marketing, technology, and other functions. I think if you zoom into marketing itself, I think you have a challenge that marketers are facing based on how those organizations grew up over years. As new channels came into existence, there was a web team, and then there was an email team, and then there was a social team and a paid media team and a content team and an analytics team. And all of these teams have kind of grown up independently, and they're each focused on their own thing. And the entity that's lost in that whole thing is the customer. The customer isn't receiving a cohesive message across those channels based on where they are in their buying life cycle. And so, I think the changes that need to happen, yes, technology, but also I think operationally within the marketing org itself needs to happen too.